I've had a musical obsession for over 20 years with one particular piece. It's a piece that I first read about in, well, this book right here. This is the Guinness Book of World Records. Now, the Guinness Book of World Records has always had a very special place in my heart, in that my grandfather is actually in the Guinness Book of World Records. He held the record for the longest distance ever swum. He did this in 1930 and swam the entire length of the Mississippi River. Fun family historical fact. His record was superseded in about the year 2000, 2001 when somebody, well, just broke the record. And I think that same guy's broken the record several times. But because of that, we always had, around my grandparents' house, copies of the Guinness Book. In fact, this is one of my grandfather's copies. And he'd get a new Guinness Book every year. But interestingly, I would read through this. I think every kid of my age would obsessively read through the Guinness Book because sometimes you just open it up and there's literal gold on the page, because I just opened the book up and on page 238, the longest skid marks. I'm not even going to touch that one. I'm going to let you think of that, what that is. But as a burgeoning musician in the early 90s, I would go through here and I would read all the music entries. And there's one that stuck out to me. Longest Symphony. And it goes through a few of them. The longest of all orchestral symphonies is number 3 in D minor, composed by Gustav Mahler of Austria. It goes on, it says, full performance requires 1 hour 34 minutes. Okay, hour 30, roughly. The longest traditional instrumental symphony is the apocalyptic number 8 in C minor of Anton Bruckner, which lasts 77 minutes. Okay. The 2-hour-long symphony number 2, the Gothic, by Havergal Brian of Britain, has been performed only twice. On June 24th, 1962 and October 30th, 1966. The total ensemble included 55 brass instruments, 31 woodwind, 6 kettle drummers playing 22 drums, 4 vocal soloists, 4 large mixed choruses, a children's chorus, and an organ. The symphony is continuous, and the choral finale, the setting of the Latin Te Deum, lasts nearly an hour and a half. Of course, my young megalomaniac self saw this and like, ooh, I need to know more. So, we're going to explore the myth of Brian's Gothic Symphony. And in order to do this, we're going to split this up into several different videos. And today we're just going to talk about the symphony itself. I have been studying this symphony, like I said, over 20 years. I first got a recording of it, the old Marco Polo CDs of it, in the summer of 98, 99, or 99. One of those years. I can't remember exactly which one. I was, had to have been the summer of 99, I think, because I was going into a senior in high school. And I got this right after my the last band camp I went to, and we were going on a family vacation. I got that on the car ride leaving from Texas Tech University and driving into New Mexico, and I finally got to hear the Gothic Symphony for the first time on a little portable CD player with the headphones and the really crappy 90s headphones that just barely covered your ears, no earbuds then. And what I heard was unlike anything I had ever heard before. Now, granted, I was only 17 at the time. I didn't have near the knowledge of orchestral literature that I have now, but it was unusual. I knew most of Mahler's works at this time, most of Bruckner's works, a lot of Wagner, Debussy, Ravel. Brian was different. So let's talk about Havergal Brian first off, because I think he's kind of neglected. Well, he's not kind of neglected. He is absolutely neglected. But I think we've largely overlooked him in musical history. And I firmly think that he should have a place in musical history right alongside the American composer Charles Ives. Both Brian and Ives are working class individuals. They're doing highly individual and unusual works. Particularly Brian's Gothic is very, very unusual. He is pushing the boundaries of what music can do in the 1920s. Ives is doing the same thing. They're going slightly different routes, but there's a lot more similarities between Ives and Brian than I think most people will give credit. So what is the story of the Gothic Symphony? Well, Brian, again, working class composer, really self-taught, but had a lot of correspondence with the major composers of the day. He was on friendly terms with Edward Elgar, Richard Strauss, to whom the Gothic Symphony is dedicated. And he studies these, and he becomes friends with Sir Henry Wood. Henry Wood is the founder and the first director of the Promenades concert, which right now we just know as the BBC Proms, the annual music festival that takes place in London every year, usually late summer. And Henry Wood suggested to Brian, you know what would be interesting? Someone should write a piece using all the old instruments and all the new instruments together. Because at this time they're starting to see a revival of some of the older instruments like oboe d'amore, basset horn, but you're also getting new stuff coming in, like the bass oboe and the contrabass clarinet and contra trombones and all these new developments. And Henry Wood said, man, someone should write, an overture. We'll play it at the proms. And Brian was like, I can do that. Except for saxophones. Those are a bastard instrument. Actually, Brian literally said that pretty much exactly. The saxophones were a bastard instrument. He was never going to touch them, but he'll do everything else. And that's also kind of Brian's personality. He was a curmudgeon. He was crass. He didn't get along well with people. He didn't get along well with his own family. Anyway, so Henry Wood suggests this, and this is probably early 1910s, and along comes World War I. And Brian goes and works in office jobs supporting the war, super depressed throughout this whole ordeal. He writes a satirical anti-war opera called The Tigers in 1919. Incidentally, Havergal Brian is the first composer that we know of that uses the vibraphone, and he uses it in The Tigers, 1919. This is quite a bit before the commonly accepted date where Alban Berg uses it in his opera Lulu. But Brian definitely does it first, probably because he had a working relationship with one of the companies that was making them that was probably just down the street from where he was living and working. But in 1919, he begins the composition of the piece that Henry Wood suggested to him. And it grows. And he works on this piece from 1919 to 1927, 8 years. And in those 8 years, he's only working at night. After he's gotten home from work, after all the household chores are done, after he has, appeased his mistress and abandoned his wife. Yeah, like I said, not a great guy. He is working in the dead of night by candlelight, and he becomes delirious, and he starts to see the ghost of Hector Berlioz come to him. And if we know anything about Hector Berlioz, is that, well, he himself was kind of a megalomaniac. And, well, let me go grab something off the shelf real quick. Berlioz's Treatise on Instrumentation has a section at the end, the famous hypothetical orchestra, where Berlioz lays out, well, this is what could be done if we had like a big festival going on and we got all the musicians together. And Brian knows this inside and out. He knows this in the translated version that Richard Strauss did, because Brian does actually know Richard Strauss, as mentioned earlier. And so Brian's starting to play with this idea. He's starting to play with the idea that we're going to include all the new instruments. It's all the old instruments. And we're going to make this grand piece in the style that Berlioz sets out in the end of his Treatise on Instrumentation. Well, if you're going to do that, you're going to need a big piece. It's going to need to be long. You can't just do a short piece like Henry Wood imagined, just an overture. You can't do a short piece. It's got to be big. It's got to be, well, massive. And that's what happens. Brian starts to compose the largest symphony ever written. Most performances take about an hour and 50 minutes. In fact, there's not a lot of performances to go on. The last performance was in 2011. The BBC Proms, the organization that Henry Wood founded, performed the whole thing once. The year before that, in Australia, it was performed. And then before that, the next performance was in 1980. So 1980, 2010. There's a 30-year gap between performances. And then, surprisingly, the very next year, you get another performance. The 2011 performance is by far the best performance of all of them. It has the others to build on, and they're also working on more corrected scores. Because one of the things with this piece is the original manuscript has been lost. How you can lose a manuscript that's like this tall and this wide, don't know, but it's probably somewhere in the BBC archives, we think. Who knows? But it's a massive manuscript. And with these scant performances that come up, well, 30 years between performances, people have a lot of time to debate the merits of the music. Is Brian a genius? Is he just a hack working out of his bedroom? Almost like a conspiracy theorist working on these ideas. And the answer, I think, lies somewhere in between. And the more I dig into this piece, like one of those crazy conspiracy theorists, the more I uncover and the more I understand about this piece. And the more I realize it is an absolute masterpiece. Maybe one of the greatest symphonic pieces of the 20th century. That's a tall order, but I think I could actually stand by that because, well, we're going to need to wait on the because we need to get into the piece itself. What's there? So in the next video, we're going to look at the orchestra, how it's both just a continuation of what has been done and then something that is completely a radical departure. So in the next video, we're going to look directly at Brian's orchestra. As always, like, comment, and subscribe down below. Let me know, what do you think of Havergal Brian, the composer? This is going to be interesting because he is a very polarizing figure, and I want to know, have you even heard of him? Most people know kind of the myth of the Gothic Symphony, but I don't think a lot of people really truly understand it. In fact, it's taken me 25 years to understand the piece, and I think I've got it figured out. So But anyway, let me know. Like, comment, subscribe, and I will get the next video up within the next day or so. So, until next time. Oh, and go listen to the piece. You gotta listen to the piece first.